Good day, everyone. My name is Holly Flores. I'm a junior at Michigan Tech. I graduated from Leeward Community College. My major is chemical engineering, and I'm a participant in the PEEC program. My colleague is Winnie Lau. She's a sophomore at MANOA. Her major is mathematics, and she's a participant in the Sophomore Success Track program. Together, we have the privilege of working under the guidance of Dr. William Uspaw and his graduate student, Ruben Coleman, in the Self-Organization and Active Matter Laboratory. The topic of the research performed is the study of small-scale kinetics for Janus particles, also known as microspheres. Next slide, please.
The primary focus of this group is to study red blood cell-sized self-propelled particles and understand how they respond to different systems with simulations, where we can see what can go right along with what can go wrong and how to avoid it. Afterwards, they can be used in different types of applications. For this summer, the group will be focused on generating data through simulation, and it will be divided into two different topics: a particle's interactions with other particles and a particle's interaction with its environment.
The laboratory has two sets of expectations for this research topic. In the long term, the laboratory firmly believes in the promise of medical application for these microsimilars in terms of targeted drug delivery, directed tissue removal and recovery, and disease mitigation. In order for clinical trials on humans to begin, all aspects of microsimilars need to be thoroughly understood. The laboratory seeks to aid this objective by providing such data. The laboratory also sees application in environmentals such as coral reef remediation and propagation, in addition to targeted cleanup from adverse human factors like spills and plastic debris. Eventually, the laboratory will combine both projects. In the short term, the laboratory aims for successful integration of Fortran and Matlab coding. From successful coding comes accurate and reliable data harvesting through simulations and analysis. Underpinning the data collection is the premise that the simulation accurately replaces actual laboratory testing. Next slide, please.
First, I'll be talking about the project that I worked on for this summer. This is the continuation of my code from last summer. In the beginning, I created two different graphs for passive and active particles, which you can see on the right. The top right graph are passive particles, where you can see how they start from the red dot and move randomly around. The bottom right graph shows the active particles, where they have more directed movement but still have some randomness. For this summer, I changed the code that I had from last summer, where I changed the type of collisions of the particles and also added boundaries and an optical trap. The data generated can then be quantified through the mean square displacement. The graph in the upper right is the average mean square displacement for each of the passive particles, and you can see that it is linear compared to the mean square displacement of the active particle in the bottom left, which is quadratic. This is my Matlab setup, where I have the parameters for the velocity of the particle, the amount of time it will travel for, their size, the number of particles there are, and their initial positions. This is the simulation that I left off of from last summer, where you can see the active particles moving around and stopping as they crash into each other and form the clusters. Once a cluster is formed, it can both grow or shrink. It grows when a new particle crashes into it, whereas it shrinks when the particle at the boundary rotates away and escapes. This is the simulation that I worked on for this summer, where you can see the collisions of the particles are different, as instead of fully stopping, they would move as close to each other as possible. There are also periodic boundaries, where if one particle were to move off one side of the screen, then they would appear back on the opposite side. This is the mean square displacement for the simulation of the particles interacting with each other, where you can see how the beginning of the line is quadratic due to the particles being active, but it becomes linear as time passes due to the randomness in the rotation of the particles. Afterwards, other factors can also be added, like an optical trap. Within the lab, the particle will be trapped in the middle of the laser, which is the red shape in the center of the lower right picture. In my simulation, you can see the particles start off scattered like before with a bit of random movement, but they are also pushed to move towards the center together and get trapped there. The collisions of the particles can also be analyzed by comparing the size of the particle cluster with the parameters of velocity and rotation. The velocity is how fast the particles move, and as velocity increases, then the size of the clusters increase, because as more particles are crashing into each other until they break apart due to the rotation. As a result, the rotation increases, the size of the clusters decrease. The next section is how one particle interacts with its environment.
This next section of the research topic focuses on the interaction of a solo Janus particle and its interaction with its environment. In this slide, there is a half-exposed Janus particle partially covered in platinum. The Janus particle sits in a solution of hydrogen peroxide, and on the surface of the platinum, a decomposition reaction is catalyzed, as seen in the upper left-hand corner. This provides the condition for propulsion of the microsimmer. Next slide, please. Since the propulsion of the Janus particle is sourced from the chemical reaction, it is important to understand how the ingredients of the reaction move about the Janus particle. In this slide, there is a cup of hot water with blue dye added. Right away, the movement of the dye can be seen. There are dark blue areas that represent high concentrations of blue dye and near colorless areas that represent low concentrations of blue dye. This photograph displays the concept of concentration gradient, a 3D space that has different amounts of substance at any particular location. Next slide, please. So to understand how the microsimmer moves, it is important to understand the movement of the materials that fuel the microsimmer. This particular plot shows a layer by layer look of a concentration gradient modeled in Matlab. Eventually, something similar to this will be utilized in a way that aspects of the gradient can be manipulated and the environmental conditions customized. Next slide, please. To sum up this portion of the research topic, the main task is to model a chemical gradient that is dynamic and fully customizable so that the basic behaviors and patterns of the microsimmer can be observed. The simulation will provide data that will further the depth and scope of the Janus particle movements. The laboratory has established a try-and-see approach to this topic by creating a brief foundation of small-scale kinetics and fluid flow to utilize when issues arise. In terms of programming, the laboratory employs the bottom-up methodology, starting off with a simple task and then increasing in complexity. So far, what's been done is the successful creation of alternative shape geometries with modifications in platinum coverage, as seen on the right, and observing the movement when the microsimmer is next to or approaching a wall. Next slide, please. In this slide, the concentration gradient with respect to the products, water and oxygen, have been successfully modeled and represented. The teal areas indicate low concentrations, while the yellow areas indicate areas of high concentration. In this simulation, the high concentration of product is seen at the boundary of the platinum catalyst, which is in agreement with what was expected. Next slide, please. The future of this portion of this research topic lies in advanced geometries for the Janus particle, utilizing the established motions learned from simpler geometries. It is hoped that the advanced geometry of the microsimmer will bring more complex activities such as sorting. In this image, the geometry of a torus or a donut can be seen. Next slide, please. For the study of a single Janus particle and its environment, the project has been able to move past basic shape configurations in anticipation of integrating advanced geometries. These efforts have been supported by data generation that are in agreement with published literature. For the study of microsimmers and their aggregate behavior, a simulation has been developed and refined to accurately reproduce results in literature. Subsequent data harvesting and analysis are in progress. Next slide, please.
Possible future works for our project could be adding more or different interactions and external factors and gathering more data with the code. If we were to continue with this project in the future, then our two codes can be combined together into one program. The simulations generated by the code can then be applied to real-life situations, as mentioned previously, like medical uses to place a robot in the bloodstream to deliver drugs to a specific area, or it can be used in our local community to clean up chemicals and microplastics in the ocean. These are references.
We would like to thank the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Department of Education, and the Native Hawaiian Science and Engineering Mentorship Program for funding us and giving us the opportunity to do research. We'd also like to thank the College of Engineering here at the University of Hawaii at MANOA for giving us this opportunity to perform research alongside mentors and faculty. We'd also like to thank especially Dr. William Usball, Kelly Ching, Ruben Pono, and everyone at the NSUB staff. That's it for our presentation. If you have any questions, please leave in the comments below. Thank you so much.